Hi, everyone. My name is Kimberly Roa Tejera. I am the Special Projects Coordinator at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. Thank you so very much for being today during our town hall, Expanding the Curriculum, Supporting Connecticut's Ethnic Studies Curriculum. With us today are members of the SERC, pardon me, I lost my words, of the State Education Resource Center of Connecticut, as well as Centro Researcher Elizabeth Taveras Rivera, and they will be speaking about the new law in which requires high school to include ethnic studies of Black and Latino and Puerto Rican curriculum in the high school level. With us now is Dr. Taveras Rivera, Paquita Jarman-Smith, Nitza M. Diaz, and Dr. Gladyz Labas.
We're very happy to have received the support of the community today. And as we begin, I want to bring awareness that today many of us are on the land of the Lenape, and I acknowledge their presence, legacy, and spirit. Our panelists today work with Connecticut State Education Resource Center, otherwise known as SERC, and Connecticut's Department of Education. Paquita Jarman-Smith is a consultant at SERC, specializing in early childhood leadership, administration, and supervision. A graduate of Bank Street College of Education, she is an expert in curriculum design, focused on creating equitable program practices. A graduate of Mount Holyoke College and the University of Connecticut, Nitza M. Diaz is also an education consultant at SERC and at the Connecticut Parent Information and Resource Center. Nitza provides coaching, professional development, and technical assistance to educators, families, community organizations, and faith-based leaders. Nitza draws on her funds of knowledge and lived experiences as a Latina Puerto Rican parent and educator, working to dismantle systemic racism, poverty, and inequities in education. Dr. Gladyz Barbosa Labas is the newly appointed Director of Equity and Language at Connecticut State Department of Education. She provides districts with the programmatic support they require to best meet the needs of the academic and socio-emotional needs of students who are English language learners. Dr. Labas co-authored the state's 1978 bilingual law, making Connecticut the third state in the United States to have such a law, which she also revised in 2015 to better provide English language learners with equal access to the curriculum. She is an associate professor in the Educational Leadership and Policy Studies Department at Southern Connecticut State University and is an officer at the university in the American Association of University Professors. She counts among her many students current Secretary of Education, Dr. Miguel Cardona. This is a flow of how the conversation will move today. And I'm just going to give you a background into the context of Connecticut. According to research by Centro staff in 2019, Connecticut had the 6th largest concentration of Puerto Ricans in the United States, with an estimated population of 302,027, with the majority of Puerto Ricans residing in the Hartford County. As many of us know, deficit perspective about Puerto Ricans and communities of color have resulted in barriers to political engagement, educational attainment, and participation in labor markets. We also know that limited knowledge about communities of color sustain structural racism and create disconnects for students who do not share the same backgrounds. We know that schools are vehicles for dismantling barriers through practices that help students develop their critical thinking skills. And today I am overwhelmingly proud to learn along with you how educators in Connecticut have brought to fruition the work that began with pioneros in education, such as Hernan Lafontaine. And I'm going to share the platform with Nitza.
Hi, everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about data, and then I'm going to ask Gladyz to come and talk about the legislation. So I'm gonna share my screen and I'm just gonna show you an overview of our students in Connecticut. So if you bear with me 1 minute. Okay, let's see. All right, before I put the real numbers up, how many Latinos and Puerto Ricans do you think are in Connecticut? Anybody can put in the chat a number, whatever number that is. No right or wrong answers. $90,000, 600,000. Okay, wow, those are pretty big numbers. Yeah. So there are 100 right here. I'm going to show you 135,000 students. Sorry, 24,000 students in our state as of 2021. That's a pretty, big number, right? So if you see that, are you able to see the slides, guys?
Yes.
So as you can see, our Latino student population has not decreased. On the contrary, it has been increasing, which makes us 30% of the population, of the student population in the state of Connecticut, meaning there are about 515,000 students in the state. So that number is pretty big, right? But I'm going to show you, I think sometimes, like, I don't like showing this type of data, but I need to put it in context for you, so bear with me. So regardless of our number right now, our Latino students are chronically absent at a higher rate than anyone else. 30.7, almost the same as African American, are students in 2020-21 that are chronically absent. That means in our state, 10 days or more of not attending school. Our Latino students are also not graduating at a rate that we would like to, right? We know that in 2019, 80.7% of our students went to a 4-year graduation rate were Latinos, and ML students, multilingual learners, only 69.4. Why am I bringing in ML students here? The reason I am is because the majority of the multilingual learners happen to be speaking Spanish and are Latinos. So when you see a number of 69.5 of English learners are graduating, that is kind of alarming because that number has almost stayed the same. The trend has not shown any any increments for both groups. So how are we doing in our performance? Connecticut has something called performance index, and you can think about, they take an average, they create this common mapping, and then from that common mapping from different summative assessments, they create a score that was converted, and then they take an average. The target is that based on data evidences that if you have students scoring at number 75 from 0 to 100, they're going to be ready for college or career, et cetera, et cetera. How are students doing, right? In 2018-19, our Latino students scored an average of 58. So if you just want to do quick math, 75 minus 58, that gives you the number that we're not even at, I don't know, 70, and 55 of our students were English learners were score at an average of 55 out of 100. But if we get them to 75, they're going to achieve. Same thing with the SAT, right? Connecticut uses the SAT as also an achievement level. And I just wanted that to show you that ELA subject, language arts, the average score was 452 out of 800. And only 5% of the students who tested at a participation rate of 94% score and exceeded level, which is, advanced. And 36% score level 3 and 4, which is like you met proficiency. And is obviously, I want to show you for EL students that 3.1% of the total scored at a level 3, and nobody scored in advance at a level for language arts, for exceeded. On the math, we have 13.7% Latinos scoring at a proficiency level, and 2.4 ELs scoring that, and 2.7% of Latinos scoring at a level 4. And so this is kind of depressing. So with all of that, right, in our state, I think we are moving forward towards the right direction. But you know, for me as a Puerto Rican, sometimes, you know, it gets emotional, because I want to be that support system as well for our students. So how do we now get our educators, and what does that look like? What is that percentage? So if 30% of our students are Latino, so hopefully we can get that proportionate 30% to be Latino educators. However, in 2021, we only have 4.6% of the total workforce to be Latino educators. So Gladyz, I'm going to stop my share.
Okay.
And pass about, and you know, we give you these numbers so that you kind of put it in context why this is so important for us in terms of a curriculum to talk about identity with our students. So she's going to share overview of legislation.
Yeah, and you're right. Identity does matter, and it truly does matter. And I practiced that, and I did that. I was a high school principal for 30 years in Connecticut, and one of the things I did was incorporate literature from the students' culture. This is before the law came into effect. And also we train every single high school teacher to be an English language learner teacher. It wasn't left up for 1 or 2 teachers. So that helped us, because this trend that Nitza showed, it could be turned around easily. It could be done. And that's why I tell people, it's, yeah, the data's there, but we could do something about it. And we did in the high school that I was in. Our attendance was 100%. We were in urban district, and my school was the bilingual setting for the students. So I had all 40% English language learners, and yet our scores was 60% higher than any urban districts in Connecticut. I mean, it could be done. But identity does matter. And I'll just give you a small example. In English, one of the books that every student, regardless what level they were in, had to read, and that was When I Was Puerto Rican by Esmeralda Santiago. And that was a book because I loved it. And so I had, and you could see the kids that were Latino walking down. They said, "Do you know they're reading about us?" And I said, "Yeah, that's good." And they were so proud, and you could see the difference. And their attitude, behavior, it was something incredible. So yes, it could be changed. And that's why I'm so happy to be in, part of this conversation and part of this curriculum which was developed. It's called Connecticut Public Act 19-12. Which was passed in June of 2019. And SERC was written into the legislation because to assist the state in writing this. And it's an excellent partnership, I may say. In Connecticut, it was the first integrated model statewide curriculum that 169 districts would need to implement. It is an elective course. It is a full year course. In the first half, in the fall, let's say, they would take the African American Black curriculum component. The second semester in the spring, they would take the Puerto Rican Latino component. And of course, it's at the high school level, and it sits at the social studies department. and it would need to be a social studies teacher teaching this. We're also developing ways to become interdisciplinary. So a lot of the topics being brought into this curriculum could be taught in other discipline areas. And like I said, it's a semester by semester focus, and it's approximately 10 comprehensive unit of studies, and it has an inquiry-based approach. In other words, it's a lot of discussion, thinking, process. And right now we have about 58 schools that are offering the course, because in 2021 and 2022, they may offer it. So we have about 58 high schools that are piloting the course. However, in 22-23, they must offer it in the program of studies, must. And so that is, and of course, we need to thank the legislators, the Puerto Rican and African American component of the legislation that came together and decided that this was important and developing legislation for this. I don't know, Nitza, you want to add to this? You're muted. You're muted.
So you would think that after 3 years, I should know how to do this, right? I spend my whole day on Zoom. But I just wanted to add that, you know, sometimes we get the question of what is the title of the curriculum? Why Puerto Rican and Latino and not Puerto Rican or Latino, or Puerto Rican and dash Latino? So I think Elizabeth showed you our numbers, and this was a response from Representative Bobby Sanchez, who was the co-sponsor of this bill. And he said that he was born in this state and he's never learned about his own ethnic group. And he felt that it was necessary to make sure that it was explicit, so that sometimes teachers will not go only to teach what they like and do not become inclusive. That was his answer, because we do get that question a lot. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Thank you. That is, yes, that is important to know. And also please understand that the title of the curriculum is African American Black Puerto Rican Latino Curriculum. That is the official name. And he's right, it's important because we want students to learn different perspective in history, not just one perspective. I mean, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and so my whole history has been from Puerto Rico, from that lens. And I always remember going to observe one of my social studies teachers, and I know Nitza heard this before, and I'm sitting there and they're talking about the Spanish-American War, and they're saying that Puerto Rico was ceded to the US, and I'm saying, what? In my history was an invasion. So, you know, and again, we need to make sure that we have different perspective. And that's what this curriculum does so well. It provides so many perspectives for students to research and question. That's why it's an inquiry-based approach to it. It's that is so important. Also, please understand that the process we took wasn't just Nitza and Paquita and I and a few people sitting around the table talking about this. No, we had 150 member advisory group developing this process. It wasn't a few people. We had 9 committees in this process. I'll just give one example. We had an assessment group, a focus group. We have a professional learning planning group. I mean, those are just to mention a few of the committees that we had. And we also had a review panel experts, and we had surveys from 217 people to teachers that we wanted their input. We also have focus groups with parents and students. So we really had many voices developing this curriculum. It wasn't just one. And we wanted, and it's so interesting that the focus group, especially for students, were very powerful. One of the things they wanted to know was a deeper study of inequality and understanding of racism as a social construct. I'm just giving you one example. That was one of the things that came out in the discussions with them. Then we had historians from Connecticut and nationally be part of the vetting of this curriculum. So that was very, very powerful. I don't know, Nitza, if you wanted to
Yep,
say
I
something.
think I was the content, I had the Latino side content committee, one of the groups that we had. And I just want to tell you, like, this is my best memory of working at SERC. We asked people to choose committees, and this content committee happened to be, it was an affinity. All the committee members that chose to be there were Latino, so that's great. So when we were looking at data, we were looking at things, I would ask the committee, okay, so what are we doing today? What topics are we thinking about? Are we thematic? Are we not thematic? What are we doing? And so I'm going to use Gladyz because Gladyz is here. So they will say, okay, I have one. So I wanted to tell you that my mom and my grandma were like using birth control pills, and they were like doing that to my mom and grandma. And as a Latina Puerto Rican, I knew where she was going, but there was the filmmaker was there. And at the end, the filmmaker says to me, how do you know what they're saying? Because it looked like disorganization, but I knew because of who I am. And I wanted to say that because sometimes in our curriculum, we make a big deal about making sure that everyone is included when they're taking the class. That we don't say, oh, well, Gladyz is talking a little bit all over the place. No, we have to learn to listen. And we make that one of our things that are really important when we were developing the curriculum, that every voice needed to be heard.
Absolutely, absolutely. Also, we make sure that in our expert groups, which were historians, scholars, and administrators, that we make sure that we provided teachers, because, I mean, this is, especially the Puerto Rican Latino component, it's new to many, many teachers and many, so we provided as many resources and materials as possible, so they would have it right at hand. And we do have what we call a book bundle that has been developed, and it gets purchased, and SERC will be purchasing that for the districts. And then they could add to that, they could add more materials to that, but we will provide them what they need in order to make sure this curriculum gets implemented in a fidelity mode, because that's important to us. And a lot of this, we're still making changes to the curriculum. We're still talking, and those that are implementing it now are giving us feedback and what they like to see more or less of, and that is very powerful. And we are taking all that into account. So when the 22-23 comes in, the curriculum will be again updated, and teachers will have this with more information and more clarity to it. Anything?
No, I think maybe we can go towards how do we roll this out and
Yes.
teacher training stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Right now we have cadres. We started last year, or a year and a half ago, I would say. We were still on the pandemic has hit us, and we had to go out virtually. And it was very, I would have to say, every training was a full house. And these are people that volunteer to be there. And they had great questions. We had, so we started like 2 years ago with it, with the training, and we continue to provide them training. And we also have coaching for them available. So we go out to the schools, or we could do it online, whatever is convenient for them. We also have an open CT. It's an online depository for resources for them. And we also put up lesson plans up, and that will be continuing. We're just beginning that, but the training is fabulous, done by SERC, and the speakers are just amazing that we get. And I thought Nitza, the most powerful speaker were the students. We just had a professional development a few weeks ago, and there were students from Arizona, and they were talking about their experience coming across the border. And I will tell you, it was like, it will bring tears into your eyes. And one of the girls says in order to get to school, she gets into a bus for 2 hours to be able to come to school, just one way. And that was such a powerful. And that's what the teachers are getting. They're getting those firsthand stories and those resources.
Right. Now, I just want to add that when we look at the teacher training, so we start, for example, next week we will have our leadership lounge for all the districts, everyone that is going to be, which means all the high schools in our state. And we do a leadership lounge to include the principal, assistant principal, guidance counselor as well. And we also talk about school psychologists. And we do that very intentional because we know from research that the leaders need to be on board in order for the class to also be implemented with fidelity. Why guidance counselors? Because, you know, this was actually one of the feedback we got last year and a half ago from a presentation we did with a group of lawyers, and one of them asked, so if somebody is getting like a trigger, what do you do? And, you know, we make notes on the curriculum, this can be triggering, please watch your students or call guidance or school psychologist. And we didn't think about that, right? But this is why we want all of them to be on board so that somebody can notice something that maybe we cannot. So we go in our cadres and have a summer institute, then we will do quarterly training with content experts. So on our side, you know, our speakers have been content experts on sample of things like Afro-Latinos, Afro-Mexicans, Afro-Puerto Ricans, indigenous, the understanding of race and racism for Latinos, and et cetera, et cetera. We had also our content speakers have been very gracious to work with us in the evening for family sessions. So Nelson Dennis from War Against Puerto Ricans have done a session with us with teachers. He talked about that legalism of legacy of colonialism, and then he came at night and did it a little bit simpler for the families, because we want our families to be part of this, which is that community outreach. We don't want to leave anybody behind.
Yeah, and also in the leadership training, and again, you know, I always mention, because I was a high school principal, scheduling is key and will be one of those topics we talk about, those logistics, because this is an elective course. It's a singleton in many districts, which means it's offered once. And the way you schedule it, you could make it or break the course. So we want to make sure that guidance counselors and those that are schedulers really understand the importance of this, and that they make sure that it happens, the students are able to take it as part of that conversation.
Right. So we want to ensure that everyone is there and everyone takes it. And you know, it's a very exciting moment. I'm but a little bit anxious, right? Because there's only 5 of us, 2 from the State Department of Ed and 3 of us from SERC, who are going to be working with all these schools to ensure that implementation is happening. And as well as the legislation states that we need to do monitoring, and we're working on what that looks like, but we do need to send in a report to legislators next summer regarding that curriculum, because we are is a state model, like Gladyz says. So I say that because we have been thinking a lot about what are the best practices? How does this happen? How does implementation happen? We knew that content, we're not gonna, we're not gonna blame anybody, would be one of the things they needed. So we focus on that. We focus on working with English learners around, what do I do for high school? If students are Spanish speakers, there are resources in our curriculum that are given in Spanish, and in our book bundle, if the books that are there are also in Spanish, they are given that. Unfortunately, we don't have other languages, but if they do find it and they need it, we're there for that. Our job is to make it also easier for the teacher to teach the course. So we offer ourselves as, coaches. And if you have a question, there is no question that's really small or big. So we want to make sure that all students are able to take the course.
Yeah. In my mind, I always look at it through an equity lens, and we want to make sure this course is open to all students. And that is why when we developed the standards, one of the things we did was include what we call in Connecticut, the CELP standards, the Connecticut English Language Proficiency Standards. I know in other states they have WIDA or, other standards, but we have CELPs. And we also, Nitza and I did training also on strategies for the teachers, regular class and teachers could use for English language learners that are in those classes that may need a little different strategies to understand the concept. We did quite a few of those, Nitza, right?
Yeah, and that reminds me. So because I'm gonna repeat and sound very repetitive, because we collect data on demographics of who's taking the course. And as an English learner myself, I want to make sure that students are being serviced, right? So the other day, one of the teachers I'm working with, I said, well, how's it going? He has someone who's actually a recent arrival, newly arrived student. And I said, how's it going? What do you need? How do we help you? And he said, oh, I got it all figured out. I did what you guys were telling us. And I said, what did you do? He's like, I went and I got the EL teacher and I showed her the content. So right now, when she goes into that class and to work with that teacher, she has the same content, same assignments that were done. And so there's support from the English learner teacher. And I was so proud of that, because Gladyz, all these trainings that we do to ensure that kids who are like me are included almost felt, I call it a best practice. I just have anecdotal data, but we're looking at a teacher who said to me, I'm having a problem with pacing because the students don't want to leave that topic. And then tell me that he also ensures that his student is not left behind. It's a big deal for me, because I know that in the curriculum, when we talk about, there's a lot of things around identity and content, we want to make sure that they all feel welcome.
Absolutely. And that's why we provide so many resources for teachers, and we continue to provide them. And even if when it starts in 22, 23, we're going to continue to provide professional development. It just doesn't stop. And that will obviously we'll have more feedback, and we'll make it even better than it is and stronger for teachers. But it's still we need to really prepare the teachers, especially many of our teachers are not familiar with the topics at all, and that's critical. And they acknowledge that, and that's why they want to learn more, which is powerful.
So
I don't know if anybody has any questions or any concerns.
Yes, there is the Q&A function. Dr. Taveras, you can start pulling from there if you'd like.
Hi, I wanted to, before we begin with the Q&A, there are a couple of questions there so far. I wanted if you could speak about how do you integrate and gain the support of communities who are not necessarily predominantly African-American or Latino?
So we invite everyone and to the place with us. We are very mindful and intentional of who we are and what we do. So we also go out and ask for, tell the families, when we send out for family professional development with families, we send it to everyone in the state, not only Latino or African American families, unless it's an affinity group. So we make sure that we also answer all of their questions, right? Because we get a lot of phone calls, sometimes positive, sometimes not so positive. And we are very good at listening and also asking them questions around, tell me what the fear is, so tell me how you're doing this. And I think Dr. Taveras, we told you, Gladyz and I, like 2 days ago, we got a parent from a smaller district who was what, I think she's white. And I said, she was very concerned about the curriculum, but she wanted someone to call her. But she was texting, and I said, this is my cell phone. You can text me and let me know when your son is ready. She's like, oh, really? You would do that for my son? And I was like, yeah. So we got to talk to him. But what's amazing to me was that this student wanted to know a little bit more about the law, and the mom as well, because he wants to take the course next year, but he hasn't seen it yet. He hasn't been, put in the course of studies. And so we talk about all these things and how to do it in a way that is really respectful. So we worked with him on what to do and what to ask, which is what a lot of parents want us to do.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna jump into the Q&A. One of the questions from Suleika was about, which you talked a little bit about, how does the curriculum support students who are multilingual?
Mm-hmm. So Gladyz said that we added the CELP standards, the Connecticut English Language Proficiency Standards. We also are adding professional development with EL teachers as well. The legislation states that the main teacher has to be social studies certified, but not if you are going to do co-teaching. How do we come together and work on that? We provide them resources for the high school, like the Excel
model,
training model that we do. Some schools are using something else, this is fine. And if they need like strategies, then we work with them on what strategy is helpful for that student. Before they come and work with us, I do ask that teacher, tell me what you know about the student. Because if they don't tell me that they know anything, then we cannot use a strategy that is personalized to that student.
Yeah, because we don't want to put all English under one umbrella, as you all know. I mean, we are very diverse. We have long-term English language learners. We have students that have just come in. We have students that are at different levels. So we want to, the more information we get about the student, the better it is for us to meet their needs, and the strategies will connect better, especially at the high school level.
I see that Nitza is answering a question from Eli Ramos, but I'll read it anyway. What are some, can you share some initial basic resources needed to begin the framework in a small state? I think they're referring to Delaware, with a small Puerto Rican population, but with high Central American populations of students.
So our Latino side, anybody can access our curriculum, has both. We have like a unit on Latinos on race, and then it has both. We have a unit, one of the lessons is on Guatemalan scientific experiments and on Puerto Rican. So you will notice there that there's not only Puerto Ricans, they're not mixed in.
Right.
The unit of SWET has a topic of Puerto Rican colonialism and then Latin American colonialism and the history of revolution. And we talk about that separately, so our students can look at both, look at different angles, and they also have the opportunity to do a project from their home country as well. So we do that in there. We decided that we will put as examples Latin American countries that are not known to have history in the United States. So when we looked at the standards for social studies in the classes, so if they teach US history, teaches Cesar Chavez is not part of the Latino side because that is already being taught. So what do? We talked about Guatemalan experiments. scientific experiments so that our students can have that. We included like a little village from Mexico. I don't remember the name, and I know that's North America, but we did that, and then we suddenly got someone said that student, that she had one student who was from there, and that he was just so excited that we included something so small. So we tried our best. It's not perfect, but yes, and also Learning for Justice has only a curriculum on Central American, for Central America that they have, and it's free. Anybody could access that one too.
And also our curriculum, because it's thematic, it's very easy to bring in different perspective from South America, the Caribbean, Central America, so we could bring those perspectives because it's very thematic. Like Nitza said, our first unit is sweat. So when we talk about sweat, what does that look like in Guatemala, in Puerto Rico, in Mexico, and so on? So you could take that and build it.
We have another question from Edwin Mercado. Why is the course, or why are the courses voluntary and not mandatory? And yes.
It was a legislative decision, and I really don't know what their thoughts were. But I believe if I was looking at it from as a high school principal, we have right now 26 credits for graduation, adding another one. I don't know how that will be going, but it was a legislative decision, and I have no background on why they did that. Maybe Nitza, I don't know if Nitza,
yeah, so when we had Gladyz wasn't working with us yet, and we had a focus group, and there were a couple of legislators there, and I asked the question because people were asking, right, why not mandate it? And these legislators said to us they needed, so in our side, they did legislation separately, and that was what they wanted, one whole year for African American, one whole year for Puerto Ricans. And they couldn't. When they went back to the floor, their colleagues said, we're not going to pass it. You don't have enough votes to do that. So they went back and said, okay, we're going to do 2 semesters. And then they said require, but one of the things is that graduation requirements are also, they just added new ones during that year as well. So it would be too convoluted. So then it went back to the floor, and they said, well, we're not going to pass it if it's a requirement. And this is kind of hard, right? Because everybody voted yes after it was made as an elective that you must offer. And so, like that legislator said there, sometimes I needed to hold my vote and say, what do I want right now so that my kids who look like me can benefit from this? Because if we say no, then we wouldn't pass because we don't have a majority of votes. The Black and Puerto Rican caucus is not the majority of legislators in the state of Connecticut. So they needed that support in order to have it pass. That's what she mentioned, and that's what she said. They are working this year on passing this as a requirement. They did pass that every single social studies curriculum that is using for all grades have to embed African American, Black, and Puerto Rican Latino studies as well. That is separate from this class.
Right.
We're nearing the end, but I'll try to get as many questions in as possible. This one is from, and forgive me if I mispronounce your name, Byung Lee, an associate professor in criminal justice at Central Connecticut State University. And the person says, there's been an increased need for educating and equipping our students with Spanish language skills and cultural awareness, particularly who will graduate and obtain jobs in social service and public safety sectors. For instance, criminal justice and emergency response professionals are often confronted with the challenges of serving an underrepresented population with whom they have difficulty communicating. In Connecticut, there are many communities that have been growing a number of Spanish-speaking residents, such as New Britain, Hartford, yet many police officers, court officials, and victim advocates have very little knowledge of the language or culture. Efforts could be made to develop courses and programs to include Spanish language and cultural competency into their curriculum. What are your thoughts about expanding the curriculum and sharing your resources at the higher ed level?
We have been doing that. It just happens that I believe Central was one of those that had an institute back 2 years ago, Nitza, am I right? On this, and it was talking about this curriculum for future teachers, because that's important. Future teachers need to know, so they walk in, they know what's expected of this curriculum. And also there's another university that's also having another summer institute that will be addressing this curriculum and training not only the future teachers, but also their professors in providing them information about this curriculum. And also we do have what we call in Connecticut, and I'm sure that other states have it, the seal of biliteracy, which is really bringing into focus how important first language and acquiring a second language is. And this is one of the for the high school is 10th to 12th grade. They will get, when they graduate, they get a seal. So that helps them getting into a university in terms of providing them a world language credit for them. And that is really important, because now they could take more courses and do more, because now we're recognizing their primary language or their second language. And that's powerful.
Well, we hate to bring it to a close, but our time has unfortunately ended. I want to thank you, of course, the interpreters. Deeply grateful to Nitza, Paquita, and Gladyz, Centro staff, Jennifer Hinojosa, Jose Camacho, Kimberly, and of course, Centro Director, Yarimal Bonilla. This has been a deep blessing for myself and for others, and I'll pass the baton over to Saba.
Great, thank you so much to Elizabeth and everyone else who joined us today, as well as our wonderful panelists for such a great event. We hope you enjoyed the event as well, and we would like for you to join us for next week's Cafecito con Amor y Anarquía. I'll be sharing the link to RSVP for this event in the chat, and we also want you to know that our recording for this event will be posted on our YouTube channel sometime next week, and I will be sharing the link to that channel in the chat as well. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you sometime soon.